few days ago, I caught wind of a video that showed up on my YouTube timeline of this HO scale Atlas MP36 locomotive. I believe it's in the Gold series, which pretty much had given me confirmation that this locomotive had finally arrived, and I contacted Train World and placed an order for one immediately that I just received mine just yesterday. Now, the videos that I looked at were of the Metrolink paint scheme. Those are the only review videos that I could actually find on this locomotive, so I guess this will be the first one in the Metrolink paint scheme. I've been wanting this locomotive for a while. It's something that I've caught wind of back when True Line Trains was producing it, and I was planning on buying one then, but just noticing all the problems that the locomotive had just as far as quality control production was concerned. There was problems with the plow. The plow didn't, would scrape up against the running rail. The locomotive, that the videos that people were showcasing, the locomotive was not able to haul a 3-car passenger set, and that was a serious issue. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that locomotive ran somewhere around $300. It was a very light locomotive from what people were saying, and I believe that's part of the reason why I had traction issues. So I wasn't about to invest $300 into a locomotive that was simply unreliable. So I said I would just either simply wait on another company to go ahead and make this locomotive, or I just simply won't get one. As you see, I have this sitting right beside my Rapido F59PH with the Metrolink. I mean, not the Metro. Well, one is in the Metrolink paint scheme, which you see me do that in the video, and one is in the Chicago Metro Rail paint scheme, which you've seen me do a review video on all 4 of the F59PHs that I have. And I have 2 running videos of the locomotives in my archives. Anyhow, this is something that I picked up, well, not that I picked up, but received just yesterday. And the review video, I'm not going to do any operations of it. I'm just going to demonstrate some features of the locomotive. I'll just give you some of my thoughts just when it comes down to some things that are being done in general in the whole model railroad industry, and just overall what I like about this and what I dislike about it. Do I think it's a purchase worthy of getting? Absolutely. However, I was hoping that they had one with the white rooftop that's directly above the cab. If I'm not mistaken, I do believe that Metrolink actually has or had MP36s that had a white rooftop. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if they do have one, it would be nice if Atlas actually made one, and I probably will pick one up if they do make it with that configuration. Also, another MP36 that I would like to get, which I don't think Atlas actually has made it yet in the paint scheme, would be in the Caltrain paint scheme. I would also like to see the MP40s in the Go Train paint scheme out in Canada. Y'all know that I filmed a few of those on this channel before as well. Now, as far as this is concerned, we would just briefly go down some details. And let me just say this much. You can see that I currently have it hitched into my Rapido Metrolink cab coach car, whatever one you feel comfortable calling it as. I've had these cars for a while. I just never did an operation video of it. I've been too lazy to actually take the time to install the decoder to control the proper lighting features. I don't know whether I did a video showcasing that this is how it comes out of the package with just one auxiliary light or ditch light on the right hand side that is operational, and the other lights are just, well, I would have to use the wand and see what's going on with it again, but I do know you have to put the decoder inside of it in order for the lights to work properly, which is something that Rapido should have done. And this is what brings me to the complaint that I have when it comes down to the model railroad industry. I'm noticing that a lot of these companies are starting to get rather lazy when it comes down to doing simple things that should be done. It should be by default that this stuff should be done. As an example, when I purchase a cab car, right, I don't want to have to install decoders in there just to get the lights to work properly. That should come right out of the box. The next thing is, I think this is a missed opportunity from Rapido. Rapido should have been the first one to jump on this right after True Line Trains failed miserably when it came down to making this MP36. The reason why I think Rapido should have been the first one to jump on this, because they take more time when it comes down to detail with the locomotive. Now, this is a very impressive looking locomotive. However, we know that Atlas is not the greatest when it comes down to detail. I'll briefly display that. We'll start off by looking at the rooftop. As you see, it has the air intake vents. None of the vents are see-through. The engine exhaust vents, which are not see-through, which they really should have done that. I could, kind of overlook the fact that the dynamic brake fans are not see-through. The fact that you have separate fans inside of the fan covers, but the grid itself is not see-through, which is something they should have done. The radiator fans, it's the same thing across, and the radiator grills are not see-through. The head end power fan, not see-through, even though it has a separate fan blade, and also the head end power radiator grill is not see-through. There's the back of the locomotive. Let me see if I can zoom out just a bit so you can get a better look at that. Let's go back to the front and let's start with the bottom detail. I'm not going to turn the locomotive upside down and let you look at the underframe. I don't do that in these videos, but I will let you get a look at the bottom. And as you can see, you got your KD metal couplers, your MU hoses, your head end power receptacle cables, or receptacles, I should say. Let's see. You got the front of the locomotive where you got the windshield wiper blades, your headlight, auxiliary lights, marker lights, and number boards that all light up. Cab also lights up as well. Right at the bottom here, I'm just now noticing this decal. I'm not sure. Let me see if I can zoom in. Maybe we can get a good look at that. If I can straighten the camera out just a bit. Let me try it. I had it just a second ago. See if I can get this thing to focus. I'm trying to just stabilize the camera. Let me see. Maybe you can see it like this. I can't really make out what that says. It's too small. All right, but anyhow, let's move on. So you got your sander hoses, your trucks, wheels, step ladders, separately applied piping, the decals for the front of the locomotive, which has the F. You got you can see the leaf springs on the trucks, the brake line connections, the brake cylinders. You can see your main reservoir, secondary main reservoir, fuel tanks, air dryers. You got your fuel tank gauge, caps for the fuel tanks, and you also have the emergency stop that's right above the fuel tank to shut the engine down, which is identical on the railroad. And then you have at the back of the fuel tank, I believe that's a water separator. This piece of piping that we're looking at right here, which they did a pretty good job on that. So the underframe does look pretty good. Separate piping, and there you have it coupled onto my Rapido Metrolink cab car. So now let's go ahead and start off with looking at the light. And as you'll see on the top of the locomotive, you got the 5-chime K5LA horn. The sounds are pretty good with this. Let's start off by turning the headlight on. That's F0, and we can put the number board lights on. Now let me just go ahead and say this. I'm probably going to go on a bit of a rant here. Is what I don't like when it comes down to Atlas when they produce this stuff, and this is why I wish Rapido would have been the first one to jump on this, is we're rolling into 2024, or no, we're in 2024 now, with the same problems we had back from 2017. Now, how many of y'all remember the ALP 45DP locomotives that Atlas released for the New Jersey Transit, and I believe the AMT Railroad back in 2017. That was a big hit. They sold out. Many people wanted them. They're a very nice, heavy, robust locomotive. But the problem is with that, just like with this, and I think this is even worse as a matter of fact, is your marker lights. As a matter of fact, no, I think it's the same if I'm not mistaken. But your marker lights are tied in with the headlights. So when you put your front headlight on, your marker lights are interlocked with the headlights. So the rear marker lights come on in the rear of the locomotive, which many of y'all, if you looked at my videos, you notice that I'll typically run locomotives like that. I'll have the locomotive in lead with the headlights on, and I just like to have the rear marker lights on display. It's just something that I prefer to do sometime. I don't do it all the time, but I do it every now and again. However, I do like to have that as an optional feature to be able to turn that off and disable that whenever I'm not using the marker lights or whenever I choose not to use it. So let's go ahead and just put it in reverse for a second. Let's go ahead and show you what I'm saying. So if I put the locomotive in reverse, the marker lights just switch over to the front of the locomotive, and now you have your rear headlight on. Now this is something I never like doing because this is completely inaccurate. It does not replicate for when you are actually operating the train consist with the locomotive trailing the unit. This is completely inaccurate, but this is what Atlas has, like I said, in 2024, this is still what we're doing, and this is something that should have been fixed a long time ago. However, let me just say I do like the way the marker lights look. They're nice and, well, you can see it's not blaring red. It's just a nice, calm red. One complaint that people are saying, let me go ahead and put it back and forward again. And let me also turn on the auxiliary lights, also known as the dish lights with F6. And also, here's another issue. And this is what the complaints that I've seen just over the videos. And like I said, the videos I looked at were only of the Metrolink, the Metro Rail, sorry about that, I get the two mixed up, version of this. But Atlas had advertised that they were going to use gold LED lights, and they haven't done that. So they've pretty much given false advertisement. I don't know what you would classify this as, or what can you really say about this. When you're paying for a locomotive, just for the cost of the locomotive with taxes and shipping, for me, costs over $338. So this is pretty expensive for them to be advertising things and not to actually have it in the locomotive. It's ridiculous that they would actually do this. This is very simple, and the fact that they would do this is really disappointing, but this is what we're dealing with still in 2024. And just when it comes down to the headlight feature, we know that Rapido, they have the marker lights and the headlights on two separate functions. So they're not interconnected with each other. If you wanted to run the locomotive in forward and have your marker lights on along with your headlights and auxiliary lights, you can actually do that. And typically when trains are just making engine moves, they'll do this. Or let's just say if the conductor happens to be sitting in the locomotive watching the shove and the engineer is in the cab car backing the train up, they'll have the marker lights on as well as the headlights and the auxiliary lights. I've seen this. So the fact that Atlas didn't take the time to actually do this is really disappointing. What's next? Okay, let's start off with some sounds. F1 is the bell. I don't think I'm going to go down every single sound, but I'll go down a few of them. F2 is for the K5LA horn, as well as the bell that also causes the auxiliary lights to oscillate. So that's that. All right, let me take a look at the next one. Let's see. F3 is for the coupler. Coupler apply and release. F4 is for the dynamic brake. I think you have to be moving the locomotive in order for that to work. So we'll try that in a little while when I have everything in operation as far as the prime mover is concerned. F5 is the HEP, head and power, the separate Caterpillar engine that's in the rear of the locomotive, which is right there. Let's activate that. Let's shut it down. Now, like usual, when I do these review videos, what I'm going to do when I fire up the prime mover, I'm going to notch up the prime mover slowly, let you listen to how it sounds in each notch. Then I'm going to rev it all the way up, straight to 8, or once I bring it back down to idle, and then drop it back down to idle. And then I'll fire up the head and power and let y'all listen to it, the separate head engine working in conjunction with the prime mover, because that's accurately how it's supposed to sound when this thing is in motion. Now, let me just go ahead and speak on the head and power. All right. I've made complaints about this for a while. I've spoken about this in a couple of review videos. That my issue with the sound file that they use for the head and power is it's not a very clear sounding HEP engine. It's accurate, but it's not clear. And when you run it, it can actually just make everything sound distorted, which is something that I don't want. I want sound effects to be nice and clear and distinguishable. I've called Rapido and spoken to them about this because I was under the impression that they were the first ones to actually record the sound file. I've actually spoke to Bill Schneider, right before they did the rebuilt second rerun of the FL9 rebuilt release. I've sent them an email. I've actually sent them video clips. So I've actually spoken to people and have tried to get them to, I just asked, listen, can you please record a separate head and power sound file? At least get us 2 different sound files that we can use so that we can just be able to select. Nothing has gotten done. Now, I was under the impression that Rapido was the first one to actually do this because I've been waiting for a passenger locomotive for years, up until 2017, that would display a separate Caterpillar engine head and power sound file. And when Rapido released their rebuilt versions of the F40, the VRL F40s, I was under the impression that they were the first ones that actually did this. Come to find out that they were not the first ones to actually do this. At least from what my documentation has shown me, that True Line Trains was the first ones to actually have that sound file recording in when they made the MP36 PHs back, I believe it was 2015, 2014, sometime around there. So they were the first ones to use that. The head and power sound file that you were listening to in this engine is the very same head and power sound file that is in the Rapido F59 PHIs or PHs. It is the very same separate head and power sound file that's in the rebuilt FL9s. It is the very same separate HEP sound file that is in the RS18 that came out with that CN coaches, Canadian National, if I'm saying it right, with the RS18 locomotive. It is the very same sound file that is in the rebuilt F40s that Rapido released back in 2017, which is the very same sound file that is in the original MP36s that True Line Trains made almost a decade ago. Now, one thing I don't like when it comes down to Rapido is when I open up the package to the rebuilt F40, what it states, and when you read the instruction manual, it says we went out and recorded the sounds from the real F40, which is inaccurate. All right, this is inaccurate. Why? Because I've been around enough F40s to know what they sound like. I've been around enough F40s on west of the Hudson, on the Metro North division, the Hoboken division. And I've also recorded a couple of VRL F40s out in Canada. So I know in the 2 F40s from Metro North to VRL sound distinctly different. So when I'm listening to the sound file that they actually put in the rebuilt VIA F40, it's not the accurate sound file. Now, the sound file that they put in there is that of maybe a GP40 or an SD40, but it's not an F40. Now, if you didn't have the F40 sound file, it's a nice substitute, but don't say that you went and got the accurate sound file from the real F40. Even the original F40s, the ones with the yellow paint scheme from VRL that Rapido made, I think it's back 2015, 2014. They say the same thing, that they got the sound file from the actual F40, and that is not the accurate sound file. And see, I'm one who's very keen on this, and I'm very particular about this. So when I hear stuff like this, I expect you to actually have the accurate recording. So what you have is these manufacturing companies are not taking the time to record accurate sound files, but they're telling you that they went ahead and did so. That's a problem for me, because there's no reason for that. This is 2024 right now. There really is no excuse for not going out and recording an accurate sound file, especially when you are a model railroad company, a manufacturing company, and you are based right out there in Canada where the locomotive is in operation. You can go to a rail yard and get these sounds. It makes no sense that they can't do this. It's unfathomable to me when a train enthusiast can go out here and record better sound files and more accurate sound files in a rail fan video than you have in model manufacturing railroad companies that produce this stuff. It's ridiculous. So it becomes somewhat bothersome to me, and like I said, I'm ranting right now, that they won't take the time. They're reusing the same head-end power sound file that is possibly more than a decade old. And who knows how long Locksound could have had this in their arsenal, or in their archive, should I say. So here's one of the something else I'll demonstrate also. All right, let me stop ranting for a second. And let's go into F8. Before I do that, let me say this. I'm no expert when it comes down to these locomotives, but I do listen to detail. And the one thing I do know about some of the Metra F40s that are out, not F40s, the Metra MP36s that are in Chicago, at least I believe they're MP36s. You have some of them that run with a separate head-end power engine in the back of the locomotive. So having the Caterpillar sound file would be accurate. And then you have some that run that simply don't have a separate engine in the back of the locomotive. Instead, what happens is the prime mover stays at a higher RPMs and uses a head-end power alternator similar to a P42 Genesis locomotive. And what Atlas should have done is actually replicate that, or have a feature to where you can replicate that by just simply having the RPMs of the prime mover just stay at a maybe notch 3 or notch 4, somewhere around there, I believe is where it stays, in order to distribute head-end power. They didn't do that. Also, when you look at the ALP45s, the New Jersey Transit that they made, the hit that they made back in 2017, the locomotive and train sets that sold out like hotcakes. The ALP45, we know that doesn't have a separate head-end power engine. It becomes frustrating to when you can model something like this and they will have a sound display and you put it on your track and you fire the thing up and it runs into a very low idle RPMs. An idle sound that I've never heard out of the ALP45. Why? Because anytime I've ever been around one, it's always in high idle. Why? Because it's distributing head-end power. Why is it that Atlas would not put this feature in the locomotive? I don't know. But there's quite a few model railroad manufacturing companies that make this same mistake, including Bachmann. All right. What is it? The 44 Siemens. Let me see what the name of the locomotive. I want to get the names right. So give me a second. I'm just going to look up got the box sitting right beside me. The CS44 Charger from Amtrak. Now I have one of those. All right. We know that's a relatively new locomotive that does not have a separate head-end power engine. It runs at a higher RPMs. It's the same thing with that one. But Bachmann did not take the time to actually replicate that. As a matter of fact, I called, I think like 2 years ago, I spoke to the guy who actually does the sound. And he didn't know what I was talking about. And I find this amazing that you can speak to people who model this stuff, and you should know this. And I'm not talking, let me phrase that, not modelers, but people who manufacture these model train sets who should know them a bit better than you and I do, and yet they don't know what I'm talking about. So it becomes a little bit troublesome when you hear stuff like this. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that was a situation. But this is something that goes on a consistent basis. So let me go ahead and fire up the prime mover, and I will go ahead and showcase what it should sound like for the MP36s that do not have separate head and power engines. So this is what it sounds like when you have it in idle. When you first start the locomotive, it should sound like this. A low RPMs, a calm RPMs, because you just are getting the engine warmed up. When you put it in run and put the reverser in direction, the RPMs are automatically supposed to go a little bit higher. It's supposed to go into a faster idle. Let me try increasing it. So it should do something like that when you, I forgot to put the drive hold on. Let me back it up for a second. There we go. So F8 is for the prime mover startup. F9 is a drive hold. That's just to pretty much lock it in position. So right now, since I got it locked in position, let me go ahead and demonstrate what I wanted to demonstrate. So when you put it in a direction, whether it be forward or reversed, the RPM should increase, something like what you hear right now. Now for the MP36s that do not have separate HEP units, that are in the Metro Rail version of this in Chicago, I believe you would hear the RPMs go up to this. So if you wanted to put it on, let's say just to get the head end power going, you got the locomotive fired up. Let me bring it back down to idle for a second. And then we're going to go up two speed steps out of 14, just to hear what it sounds like. No, actually I should have corrected my controller. I don't have it at 14 speed steps. Let me set it there now. Let's try this one more time. Okay, so we're going to go up to 2 speed steps out of 14. It should sound different. Okay, now if I'm not mistaken, that's how this locomotive, well not this particular one, if this were a Metro, the ones that don't, I think there's a handful of them that just run head end power just by using a separate head end power alternator, not in a separate engine. This is somewhat how it should sound. I think it should sound in this RPM rate of what you were hearing right now. See, Atlas should have actually came up with a feature that duplicates this, so that way you can actually replicate that separate head end power sound. But you know, they didn't take the time to do this. They should have also put a feature on this to where you can run it in a higher RPMs when you're ready to put it in run. Because in most cases, the locomotive, when it's in operation and you're servicing a train station, you're probably not going to hear it sitting at the lowest RPMs. You're probably going to hear it sitting more or less right where you see it here right now, versus how it sounds when you just sit back and start the locomotive. All right, so with that being stated, we're going to manually notch up like I told you. And I'll be honest, I like the way it sounds in this RPM right here. full RPMs. And we're going to go back down to idle. Alright, so that's for the notching up. F9, like I told you, is the drive hold. F10 is for the independent brake. Let's try that. Independent brake release. Let's see. F11 is for the radiator fan. But that works when you have the engine in high RPMs. And by the way, that also comes on automatic. Turns on and off automatically when you rev up the engine. So let's go ahead and try the radiator sound. We'll rev up the engine, then because it's only going to work when you have it revved up. Hit F11 right now. Let's try it again. Let's bring down the RPMs. And there's your radiator cooling fan. Let's turn it back off now. Get it off. Alright. F12 is to dim the headlight. We'll briefly do that. As you can see, it's dim right there. Let's put the headlight back up. F13 is a flange squeal, which I believe that only work when the locomotive is moving. Oh, by the way, F4 is a dynamic brake, which I believe that only work when the locomotive is moving. F14 is for the cab lights. Let's try that. Cab lights on, you can see the interior. I didn't get a thorough look to see if it's fully detailed, but that's with the cab lights on. I'm probably not going to use that feature a whole lot. F15 is an isolation switch to pretty much when you have it isolated, from what I've noticed, and this will be accurate. You can't rev the locomotive up, you won't increase the RPMs. I don't think you can operate any of the features that are included when the engine is revved up. It just keeps it in idle. You can use the bell, the horn, the lights, things of that nature, but you can't use the, as far as revving it up or moving the locomotive. It just keep it locked in place. So F16 is for the air dryer on shutdown, which I'm not going to play that right now. F17 is for the brake set, release automatic. F18 is for the sanders. Like I said, I'm not going to go through every single sound file and read through some of it. F19 is a short air let off. F20 is an air compressor, which you can hear it right now, so I don't have to hit that. And we should know what a compressor is, but for those who don't know, that's that clanking sound that you heard a little while ago. And I believe what lock sound is now doing is they're setting it up to where the compressor, the rotation of the compressor match the RPMs of the engine. So when you rev up the engine, if the compressor is on, it'll actually start to increase and make that clanking sound a lot faster to match the RPMs of the engine. So that's just on that note. Let's see. F21 is an air dryer. F22 is the cab doors, which I'm not going to play the cab doors and stuff like that. F23 is the engine compartment doors. I'm not going to play that. F24 is the center, the reverser. That pretty much is kind of similar to the drive hold. You can lock the locomotive in place. Well, no, actually, it's different. The center and the reverser means you won't be able to move the locomotive. You just keep it in place and you can rev it up and rev it down as you need to, just as far as the engine is concerned, but you won't be able to move it. What else? 25 shutters opening and closing. So that's the radiator shutter. So let's try 25. Which that is accurate. Where are we at now? 25, 26, manual notch up and down. 27 is the same thing, manual notch up. 29 is the low. I'm not sure how that's supposed to work because there's no details in this that tell you what it's supposed to actually do. At 30, automatic brake. At 31, sound fader. Alright, so what I want to try is the dynamic brake. So I'm going to move the locomotive and let's take the drive hold off and let's go forward. So forward for dynamic brake. Let's see if it comes on. Alright, let's shove it back in the opposite direction. This is what it sounds like when using the dynamic brake. Okay. Let's put it back and forward. Put the drive hold back on. So we got to see it move in some slow speeds. It's not the smoothest at slow speeds, but Atlas locomotives have never been as smooth at slow speeds. But it's good enough for me. Let's see. Oh, like I told you, I was going to go ahead and activate the head and power, and we're going to listen to the head and power and the notching of the engine working at the same time with each other. So let me go ahead and just bring this up into a higher notch. Put it in drive, give it a direction what you're supposed to actually hear when you're running the locomotive, and let's fire up the separate head generator. Okay, so there goes my head and power. Alright, let's notch it up. head and power. Let me kill the prime mover sound. So that's the Atlas MP36. But overall, I think it's a pretty good locomotive. However, I do think that this is a missed opportunity from Rapido. They should have been the first ones on this, but they seem to be prioritizing other things like buses and other stuff, but that's beyond the point. I do plan on getting this in operation in a video. I probably will pick up maybe 2 more. I don't know if I'm going to get one in the Metro Rail paint scheme. That I still got to decide what I'm going to do with that. I do hope that they decide to produce one of these in the Caltrain paint scheme. That's what I really would like to have in addition to the Metrolink. However, y'all, listen to my gripes when it comes down to this. I wish that the people who produce this stuff would take more time to produce it with better quality, to really get accurate sound files. Like I told you before, with the separate head and power sound file, we should at least have 2-3 other recordings that we can select from. Because some locomotives don't all have a Caterpillar engine. Some of them have Cummins engines, and they should be trying to accurately record those sound files. Like I said, I've recorded several over the years, and y'all have seen me put it up for display, and you can hear how it sounds very distinguishable, and I would like to be able to demonstrate that in these model railroad videos. I don't want it to sound like a bunch of distortion. And it seems to be, when it comes down to the hobby of railroading, whether it be model railroading or even in simulator games, I'll say this much, for those of you who played Train Sim World 4, the F-125, I will say that they did a beautiful job with that locomotive, and what I'm most impressed about it is the sound. Is the engine stays at a higher RPMs to do what? To replicate head and power, which is what it's supposed to do. This is what you want it to do. And that's how you're supposed to do that with the F-125, because we know that that locomotive does not have a separate HEP engine. It just does it off of its prime mover, which I believe it has 2 Cummins engines, if I'm not mistaken. Once again, I'm not an expert on that, but they do duplicate that sound file by keeping the RPMs in a higher, the engine sound file in the higher RPMs. It's the same thing that should have been done with the Atlas New Jersey Transit ALP 45 DPs that Atlas built over 5 years ago. It's the same thing that they should have done, even when it comes down to the MP36s, because like I told you, some of them in the Metro Rail don't actually use a separate HEP engine. But even when it comes down to Train Sim World, and I'm kind of bouncing back and forth here, so just bear with me. Train Sim World got that spot on in Train Sim World 4. But we know when they made the MP36 and the F40s, they used a generic, separately applied head and power sound file that you can't distinguish. You can't even determine whether it's actually on or not, because it sounds so vain. So this is, I don't know what it is. It seems like a lot of these companies like to just gloss over that fact or that reality that passenger locomotives run with head and power. This is something that people need to understand if you're going to manufacture these things. But then again, you know, Atlas is the same company who a couple of years ago, when they released the ALP 45 DPs, beautiful locomotive, even though it doesn't have the see-through grills and whatnot, a beautiful locomotive. However, what really was the deal, was a turnoff for me, was the fact that the front handrails, they didn't even take the time to put that stuff in. Instead, what they gave you was a template and said, hey, you can drill it into your locomotive. Now, you're purchasing a locomotive now. You're the modeler. You shouldn't have to drill anything into your locomotive. But now they're telling you can drill into your locomotive and take a chance in really ruining and destroying the whole thing, just to go ahead and put these handrails in that they should have done, that should have already came installed in the locomotive fresh out of the box. So I believe there's a lot of shortcuts that are being taken here when it comes down to this, and I really would like to see the quality control improved, because we're paying a lot of money for this stuff. Like I told you, with shipping and handling, all of this came up to over $330 for me, which I would gladly spend that and more but I want a quality product. It makes no sense to have the same problems that we had in 2017 with the marker lights and the headlights being interlocked with each other, still persisting in 2024. This is something that simply should not happen. You know what I mean? And like I told you before, I believe that Rapido should have been the one to jump on this. Rapido should be the one actually producing them, and Athens Genesis, I would say, should be the ones producing all of these passenger locomotives because they're the most detailed and they have some of the best features when it comes down to whether they use a T-Tsunami decoder or whether it's an ESU lock sound decoder. They should be the ones producing this. There was one other thing I wanted to say. The only other passenger locomotive that I can think of that uses a separate HEP sound file outside of an F40 that uses it through the prime mover in the model industry is the Amtrak P42s or P40s. But the problem with that is this. Yes, they have a General Electric 12-cylinder engine that's revved up, or 16-cylinder, whatever it might be. But it's not the accurate sound file from the actual P42. So what they're doing is they're taking sounds recorded from maybe a Dash 9 or some other a U-boat or some other General Electric locomotive, and they're slapping it in the P42 and saying, here you have it right there. And then we gave you a feature to where you can replicate head end power that puts the prime mover at a higher RPMs. I think it goes into notch 6, which none of them go into notch 6. I think it's notch 4. But this is what they're actually doing, and it's not accurate. So understand that this is something that is very important to me. Accurate sound files are very important to me. And at this point in time, there's no reason for these companies who have connections to these railroads that could say, hey, can we come to your rail yard and record the sounds off of this locomotive because we're modeling the locomotive. They have to get the license before they can even model the locomotive. So it just doesn't make sense that they don't take the time to actually go out and do this. I think what's happening is there's a lot of shortcuts being taken. They'll call ESU lock sound, hey, do you have the sound of a General Electric engine, a 12-cylinder engine? Oh, yeah, we got that. And they just slap in anything into the locomotive. And I think that's ridiculous because it should never be done. You always take the time to actually go ahead and record it, even if you ask somebody to record the sounds for you if you can't get there. However, when it comes down to this one here, I'm going to say that the prime mover sound files, at least from what I've heard, are accurate. So I'm going to say that Atlas did a good job with that. I wish they would have taken the time to record the actual head end power sound file, at least get us 2 or 3 more separate sound files. Because there's a lot of them that sound vastly different. Some of them have loud mufflers that give it a distinct sound. And so I just think that would give it more diversity. But anyhow, it is what it is. Overall, I'm happy with the purchase. I just wish, and this is just my complaint when it comes down to the model railroad industry, the hobby industry of railroading, period, that people would take more time to be more precise and be more accurate and get things down to precision. I think if we can do that, then this will really be a exciting hobby to enjoy, because you got to think about it. This is probably one of the most expensive hobbies you can get into. It's not like buying a drone. And you might say, well, drones cost $1,000 to buy, or however much it costs. Okay, yes, that's true. Off the rip, to purchase a drone costs more than, in certain cases, maybe more than 3 times the amount of an HO scale locomotive. But once you buy it, that's it. You just follow the instructions, charge it up, take it to a park, and you can enjoy it. Now, in order you can buy a model train set, doesn't mean you can actually run it, because, okay, I purchased a locomotive. Well, I want to see train cars connected with the locomotive so I can actually replicate the set. Okay, now that I got train cars, I have no way to actually run it if I wanted to see it in operation. Now you got to buy the tracks. And if you like to do authentic model railroading like I do, actually setting up routes and destinations and having a northbound, southbound, or different terminal tracks that you can go into and have different trains going to different locations, then that's going to cost you some money. Somebody who really is into the hobby, you're spending thousands of dollars on this hobby when it's all said and done. The least you want is for the manufacturing companies to get the sounds right. You're producing a locomotive, have the handrails and the details already installed on the locomotive. I shouldn't have to drill into a locomotive to put in ditch lights. That makes no sense. I'm paying enough money for this as it is. Some of these things are $300 or more a pop. You expect this to come automatically with the locomotive. So with that being stated, that's my rant. I'm going to get on out of here. I'm finished ranting. I said what I needed to say. Overall, like I said, I'm happy with the purchase. Depending on if they come out with another Metrolink with the white roof over the cab, I most certainly will purchase that. And if they come out with any for the Caltrain, I most certainly will purchase that. Will I decide to do so in the Metro Rail? I'm not exactly sure yet. I mean, I do have a F59 PH in the Metro Rail, so I probably will purchase one in the Metro Rail. But we'll have to see how that goes. It would be nice to see if Rapido would actually go ahead and do something like this, or Athearn Genesis. And before I close out my rant, let me just say one other thing. With Athearn Genesis, Athearn is the only model train manufacturing company to produce an F59 PHI. Now, this is an F59 PH. Okay? Rapido is the only ones that actually made this, these are beautiful. I love these. But Athearn is the only one that actually produced an F59 PHI, which I would love to see one in HO scale in the Genesis fleet. I don't understand why they would take an iconic locomotive like that and put it in their ready-to-run fleet. Now, they decided to upgrade it and put it to sound and have some light features and just have it just with DCC, which, I mean, come on. They took their P42s and decided to convert them to the Genesis fleet, which is what they should have done. In my opinion, Athearn needs to just get rid of the ready-to-roll fleet, get rid of that altogether, just have Genesis with DCC and DC ready. Everything else, just do away with it. There's no reason to take a locomotive like that and not have it in your Genesis fleet. But that's just my complaint. These are my gripes when it comes down to these model railroading companies. This is stuff that they should have already known not to do. But with that being stated, once again, I am happy with the purchase. I do hope that these companies decide to make some reconfigurations down the line to really give a good quality product, because I understand they want it to where kids can buy this. But listen, you don't take a locomotive like this or a train set like this and hand it to your 5-year-old. You're not doing that. You have to be of a mature age. Probably, they say 14 is the age. Probably 17 might be a safe age in order for you to have a kid play with this or run these, because these are expensive. So like I said, overall, I'm happy with the purchase. I might decide to buy a few more down the line. I'm going to see what else comes out down the line. And when I decide to go ahead and produce an operational video, you will be the first to see it. And until then, I will see you on the next one.